welcome to everyone who's joining us, whether you're in North America, Europe, or Asia. I'm Richard Fontaine, Executive Director of the Trilateral Commission's North America Group. And I wanted to welcome you to another one of our virtual meetings. Today's will focus on Myanmar, and unfortunately, I think as we all know, it's a timely issue. On February 1st, the Tatmadaw, Myanmar's military, launched a coup against the elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi and took power. And now we see since then daily protests and violence on the Burmese streets, and countries around the world formulating possible responses to what has been going on there. To discuss the issues today, we have three really superb experts, each of whom has a very strong grasp on what's happening in Myanmar and thoughts about the proper responses to it. Kelley Currie served until January as Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues, and prior to that as the U.S. representative to the UN Economic and Social Council, and the alternative representative to the UN General Assembly, and she's on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, among other things. Bilahari Kausikan is chairman of the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore. He served as permanent secretary of Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, among many other positions, including Singapore's ambassador to the United Nations. He's a member of the Trilateral Commission, and as I once wrote in an article, I referred to him as a legendary Singaporean diplomat, although that doesn't mean old, it just means that he's done many things over the course of his career. And Derek Mitchell is the president of the National Democratic Institute and former US ambassador to Myanmar. He was the first American ambassador to that country in 22 years. He previously served as the State Department's first special representative for Burma, among his many other positions. So as we've done with our other calls, I'll get the conversation started by asking some questions, and I invite anybody who's got a question, either use the raise hand function or somehow otherwise indicate that you have something to ask. So let's get started. And Derek, maybe I can start with you and ask you, I know you're in touch with folks on the ground in Myanmar. What are you hearing, and what's your overall sense of the responses of the population since the events of February 1st? And where do you think this is going?
Well, thank you, Richard. Thanks everybody for joining this. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this issue of the heart as much as the head for me. I think all three of us have been in touch with folks on the ground in one way or another. And, the attitude there is of enormous sadness, frustration, anger, resilience, defiance. There's a kind of not again, and we're not going to take it. Those of you who know Myanmar history know that this is not the first coup they've had. They've had several other coups, 1962, and led to a period where they took the country from being, not entirely stable. There was still a civil war going on in the country. It's the longest running civil war in the world, but it took a country that was at least one of the great hopes of Southeast Asia and of Asia. And Bilahari can speak to this. It had the greatest universities and just an educated population, the rice bowl of Asia. The military took over and made it into a basket case over several generations. There was an uprising in 1988 against that. Military cracked down, another coup, and then held on until, 2011, there was a quasi kind of transition, but really it was just the military took off the uniforms. They won an election that was not competitive. But over the last 10 years has been a steady reform and opening up, as it were, a liberalization of the society. And the younger generation has gotten used to that. So, and they put up cell towers, and they've had access to the world, and civil society has been opened up, and there were elections in 2015 that were largely credible, led to a landslide. The opposition, National League for Democracy, and Aung San Suu Kyi, and she and her party took over. And that was part of the government because the military though, through all of this, had sort of controlled this transition. They had a constitution that allowed them to have 25% of the parliament, allowed them to control all the security ministries, defense, interior, border affairs. So it was always a quasi transition and a delicate kind of dance between the military and the civilians. But that still somehow wasn't enough for the military. And they committed the coup on February 1st. And the people have just simply said, we're not going back. We got a taste of freedom. We got a taste of, even though it may not be all, as far as we would have liked, it is in the right direction. And in particular, you're seeing young people and young women, I should add, who are leading a fight on the streets to simply say, you've messed with the wrong generation. There's a massive civil disobedience movement where people have just stepped away from their jobs, whether it's in banking or in government or in healthcare, in defiance, taking to the streets. And the military has done all what it usually does, is just fire on everybody and been thugs. And, we can get into what they claimed originally for the reason for their coup, but it clearly is not the reason. They simply want power and money, and they want to own the country the way, we say Pakistan, the military has a country rather than the country has a military. It's the same in Myanmar. The military seems to think they own this country and they're responsible for it and they should get all the perks of it. And the people are simply saying, they're fighting to the end. They're not going to give up. And it's creating an enormous amount of challenge on the ground with already the economy was decimated by COVID and other factors. And this has just tipped it over into a real economic disaster. But the people are simply saying, we're not going to give up our freedoms, hard-won freedoms easily as far as they went. So what we hear on the ground is, stay with us. You must stand with us at all costs. We're putting everything on the line for this. We are sacrificing enormously. So if we're going to sacrifice, we just ask the world to be with us. Don't legitimize this government. Shut down all the money and all the support for this illegal regime. Don't give it weapons, and do everything you can to show that this will not stand, so that the people who won again a landslide election, I should say, last November, that we get our way, because this is an illegal outfit. So that's essentially a little bit more than you expected in terms of history, but it gives context to why people on the ground are feeling as they are. They're fed up and they want their country back.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you. Bilahari, let me go to you. So Derek was just saying, was talking about how the people on the streets are asking the world to sort of stand with them and so forth. You have an article recently in Foreign Affairs, characteristically frank, and argues that the sanctions that the U.S. and its allies imposed on Myanmar from the 90s up through the first decade of 2000s didn't actually change the junta's behavior at all, and that Western governments should cooperate with the Tatmadaw, with the Burmese military, and concede the sidelining of Aung San Suu Kyi. So why is that the better course of action than renewed pressure on the Burmese military?
Thanks, Richard. I don't say it is the better option at all right? But the fact is this. The fact is the Tatmadaw, the Burmese military, or the Myanmar military, is a central political reality, whether you like it or not. Secondly, I think you have to understand, when the Tatmadaw says that it is the savior of the country, it is not entirely a self-serving statement. The Tatmadaw has been fighting separatist movements since day one, since 1948, when Myanmar became independent, right? And there are these fault lines in Myanmar society, in Myanmar, the polity, and you can't wish them away. Now, where are we now? We are now where the Myanmar military has pulled yet another coup. This is the fourth coup, right? There have never been a viable civilian government in Myanmar. Never. There was a short period recently of a civilian government, but you can't recreate civilian institutions that have atrophied, degenerated over 50 years overnight. Not in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. You can't do it. Whether you like it or not, you have to deal with the Myanmar military. Secondly, there is a real possibility of Myanmar fragmenting. Fragmenting in the way it's a different region, of course. Iraq fragmented, Syria fragmented, Libya fragmented, and that will be a continuing source of instability in the midst of Southeast Asia. Nobody wants that. Thirdly, what are you going to do? What is anybody really going to do? ASEAN has no great influence over the Tatmadaw, the Myanmar military. Neither does China, neither does India, neither does the United States, neither does Europe. Nobody has. The initiative is with the Tatmadaw. Let us accept that bitter fact. And if we cut off the Tatmadaw, then they will just do what they want. They will still do what they want, but to a certain degree, they have to listen to other people. ASEAN recently had a summit with a special summit on Myanmar, and Senior General Min Aung Hlaing attended. He did not object to the consensus that was reached on 5 points. I won't go through the 5 points. This is an esoteric thing. But he didn't object. He attended. Why did he attend? That was very significant, I thought. He attended because he was confident enough about his back. In other words, if anybody was hoping that the Tatmadaw was split, that there was some disagreement, forget it. He was confident enough to go to another country and defend his case. Now, the fact of the matter is we just have to be patient. The best we can hope for is that the Tatmadaw will do what they said they would do. That's in a couple of years, there was some form of election and return to some form of civilian government. Now, it's not a satisfactory situation. In fact, it's a terribly unsatisfactory situation, but it's the best that can be. Who is going to intervene in Myanmar, fight the Tatmadaw, and put Aung San Suu Kyi's government back in place? The simple answer is nobody. Now, what can we do? We can try two things. First of all, we can try to minimize the loss of civilian lives. And we should try to do that. And in fact, according to statistics by the opposition, the Myanmar opposition, the curve of people killed has considerably flattened. It's considerably flattened for all the wrong reasons, because a lot of people have been arrested, a lot of people have gone underground, and the scale of demonstrations is considerably lower. However, I think we are moving into a much more dangerous phase. Dangerous because some sections of the opposition, at least, have been talking rather wildly, in my point of view, about armed struggle. They are trying to make common cause with the ethnic armed organizations which have been fighting ethnic separatist insurgencies since 1948. That's very dangerous because it can cause Myanmar to fragment. And if it fragments, you have a Libya, a Syria, Iraq in the midst of Southeast Asia, and that's not good. So let's be all very realistic. Let's work in a cold-blooded way to try to do the best we can, which is not very great, but it's still the best. The best is in 2 years or so, we have some form of election, we have some form of return to civilian government. In the meantime, ASEAN is trying to engage the Tatmadaw and is trying to provide a channel when the Tatmadaw feels secure enough to climb down from the position they are in. We are there. Thanks, Richard. That's all.
All right, thank you. Let me go to Kelley, who I suspect has potentially a slightly different view on things, which would be good to hear. So, so Kelley, in addition to your responses to what Derek and Bilahari have had to say, I'd be interested in whether you think a return to the status quo before the November 2020 elections is possible, and what to Bilahari's, I think, the question he's raised, what are really the vectors of influence that other countries have over the Tatmadaw?
Thanks, Derek. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to match wits with Bilahari on these things, because he does have this incredibly deep experience and comes from a very very strong perspective of having worked in the region and knowing the institutions that deal with these issues in the region. But I do have to respectfully disagree on a couple of points. First of all, I would point out that yes, the Tatmadaw is there. It's a fact of life. We can't wish it away. But at the most, they've got around 400,000 people 400,000 men under arms. There are 54 million Burmese people, and they are not very happy right now living under the Tatmadaw rule. And they have made that very clear, as Derek has outlined. And it is not up to us. Bilahari is right about that. You know, those of us outside looking in are not going to determine events on the ground in Burma in any meaningful way. Maybe at the margins is the best that we can hope for. And that includes ASEAN, and that includes other great powers or regional powers that have aspirations to manage the situation one way or the other. And that includes the United States. It is up to the people of Burma to decide their future. And they have made very clear what they want. And Bilahari is right that the escalation of conflict is a real possibility, but this is already done. They're not just talking about doing this, it's happening. We've seen not a huge number of defections from the Tatmadaw, but significant in terms of officers leaving. Ethnic armed organizations are reporting that the Tatmadaw is abandoning positions in certain places and just dropping their weapons and running away in others. And we have seen what has been unique about this and about this revolution is the degree to which it is not just a Bama Buddhist lowland urban phenomenon led by a bunch of elite Bama fighting against the Bama Tatmadaw. This revolution has been multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multi-confessional, which is really interesting. And one of the most amazing impacts of it has been a greater sense of empathy among the majority Bama in the heartland and the dry zone toward the ethnic nationalities, a recognition that they have not been touched by the 70 years of civil war that have been going on in the background of the country. And they have not acknowledged and been really sympathetic toward the ethnic nationalities, and also a greater awareness of an issue that hasn't come up yet of the Rohingya, and even greater sympathy toward the Rohingya over the past 100 days, which has been a remarkable development that I've seen among the young activists, especially. They've been driving it. And so no, the status quo ante is no longer an option. It's wishful thinking at this point to think that we're going to go back to January 31st, rewind the clock, and seat the NLD government that was elected in November 2020. The activists on the ground have moved past that. The national unity government has moved past that. They have created a national unity government that is multi-ethnic and is far more diverse than anything we've ever seen since the founding of the country in 1948. And so I think that we are in a very, very different political space on the ground. And I would argue that it's not realistic at all to think that that the Tatmadaw is going to be able to govern this country, even if they, are trying in the short term through force and coercion to do so. Long term, the people of this country have shown that they will make it ungovernable. They will burn down their own economy to keep the Tatmadaw from having it. I mean, that's literally the mentality that I get from these folks. And I'm talking to them every night. I'm up talking to the activists in Burma, and they're like asking me, how can we do more to destroy our own economy? What do we need to do to get the United States to really help us burn it down? And they are not joking, and they are well connected. What has transformed in the past 10 years is you have a diaspora of young, smart Burmese people who have gone out, gotten educated. They are all over the place. They're in Australia, they're in the UK, they're here in the United States, they're all over Europe. They are lawyers, they are they're very, very smart. And you have a generation in Burma that's been working for international organizations, international corporations, starting their own businesses, doing all sorts of things over the past 10 years. And when Derek says that they are like, you've messed with the wrong generation, we're not joking. These kids are connected, they're digital natives, they know what they're doing. And the junta has so wrong-footed by doing this. And I don't even think they really even realize the degree to which they are behind the curve and how completely isolated within society they are. And I think, sure, maybe they could try to run out of bullets shooting everybody, but we're past an inflection point where the status quo ante is a possibility, in my opinion. And I think that, going to Jakarta, for instance, thinking about ASEAN, Min Aung Hlaing didn't go to Jakarta because he was confident. He went to Jakarta because he needed the legitimacy, because he was invited and because he could go. He could get on a plane and go. Nobody could stop him, certainly, but he certainly didn't impress anybody in Jakarta with his presentation, which, as far as I know, I don't even know that he spoke during the summit.
He did.
There was very little reporting out about it, except in a New Light of Myanmar. And then he blew up the 5-point consensus before he even had landed back in Naypyidaw. And he continues to, and the SAC, the State Administrative Council, the junta, continues to say, well, we'll consider doing some of these things in this 5-point consensus as soon as we get the country back to stability, which tells you that the country is not stable and that they are not in control. This is, when I'm talking to, I'll give you a good example that last night, the phone call that I was on last night with the group that's working with the finance ministry and the national unity government is, they're looking at how do we get sanctions on Singaporean banks that are holding the accounts of the junta so that they can't access their money. And it's very sophisticated conversations. They're asking very sophisticated questions, and they're asking, they're asking governments around the world, look, we're not asking you to invade and take them out or bomb or do any of those things. We're just asking you to at least get out of our way while we burn down our own economy. I've never seen anything quite like it, frankly.
All right, thanks, Kelley. So I think we have a good discussion now. There's a couple questions that come up in the chat, which I'll get to. If folks want to put other things in there, raise your hand, by all means do so. Derek, let me just come back to you for a minute though. So there's two sort of counter arguments to the notion that the right response is greater sanctions, or at least two. One is this idea of essentially helping burn down the economy. The last projections I saw went from Myanmar having about a 2% projected growth rate this year to a negative 20% post-coup, and who knows if that's right, but that's pretty significant. And do we risk sort of a failed state? And then the other, of course, is the one that is nothing new, but has been bandied about for many years, which is that you push the government into the hands of the Chinese, which has strategically unfavorable repercussions for those who find themselves in competition with the Chinese, whatever the merits may be on the human rights front. So where do you come down on this sanctions issue and the repercussions potentially thereof?
Who are you asking?
Oh, I'm asking Derek, and then Bilahari. Let's go to you after that.
All right.
Right. On sanctions, look, I mean, burning down the economy is, there's more than 10% of the people who are food insecure right now, and it's only getting worse. And the questions of whether, you could have a humanitarian crisis in the country. Look, sanctions on, targeted sanctions against particular businesses that are contributing to the military's rule or to the money flow to the military, I think is worthwhile. I think you need to show that we will not contribute to the military and their families and their perks. Whether it hits the broader economy, as Kelley says, I think it's extremely unfortunate that people are, I can see them having sacrifice or accepting sacrifice and civil disobedience, burning down the economy. We can't control it, but I think that's a radical thing to do inside the country and not necessarily a good thing for the country and the country writ large. And there are a lot of people that are sort of caught up in that at the popular level who will suffer more than others, maybe more than elites will. So, I don't, we have to be very careful in that regard. But I'm not against sanctions. I think it just depends what the sanctions are and what they're focused on. And it should really be targeted and addressing those that are in the way of change, and that's clearly the military and their allies and their cronies. In terms of pushing to China, I'm not one of those who believes in that argument. Very strongly, I don't. The last thing they want is, in fact, one of the reasons they opened up 10 years ago, I think, to us and others was because they were unhappy with having to rely on China. There's probably no institution in Myanmar that dislikes China and that China dislikes and mistrusts more than the military. Military and China have a terrible relationship. The Chinese had a pretty good with Aung San Suu Kyi, relatively good with Aung San Suu Kyi in the NLD, because she, after the Rohingya crisis in 2017, she basically said, and I heard it was verbatim, well, we'll just turn to the Chinese. The West doesn't want to work with us, fine, we'll turn to the Chinese, which was absurd. But that was their attitude, and the Chinese took advantage of that. I think the NLD dealt with them pretty well, but overall, the Chinese had the legitimacy of the NLD government on their side, and they didn't have to deal with the military. So I think it's leverage on the military to push them to China in a way. They don't want to do that. The people despise China. The Chinese don't know what to do at this point because they know that to side with the military would be a disaster for all their interests in the country. They do not want instability on their border. They do not want all their economic investments to be at risk, including not just industries, but road and rail. They care about their Belt and Road Initiative. Access to the Indian Ocean is extremely important to them. And this instability in the country has already started to wash against them. They're viewed as part of the problem. And if you see more military or military action and fragmentation in the country, it can mean terrorist attacks against their pipelines or attacks against their interests more and more. They know this. So they're going to be very, very careful in this regard. And the military does not want to have to turn to them. So I think it's very simplistic to say, oh, if we sanction them, they'll turn to the Chinese, and then what can we do? I think we should be thinking, and again, I think a lot of Bilahari's, if I may say respectfully, a lot of his analysis and as such is also very simplistic and old think and doesn't really hold together. The realist or so-called frank perspective is frankly slanted and not seeing the situation today as it is. We can't go into all the detail, but I can pick apart everything that he said and look at it differently in order for us to recognize this is a different moment. This isn't Thailand 2014. This isn't a typical coup in Asia, in Southeast Asia. There's a lot at stake, and there are a lot of factors that Kelley outlined, that I've outlined, that we can't control, that are going to create very, very difficult conditions in the heart of Asia, crossroads of Asia, that we need to think fresh and differently about if we're going to get on top of it.
Bilahari, let me go to you, but first let me say you are sideways, and I see most of your chin and part of your.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there you go. So
can you see me now?
Yeah, you're great. You're great now.
Okay.
So
Right,
maybe
sorry about
maybe
that.
you can. No, you're great. Maybe you can address this question about potentially pushing the country into the arms of China, and also on the ASEAN role here. I mean, it strikes me that Vietnam and Cambodia and Thailand probably aren't going to be at the forefront of pushing for good governance and you know, a return to you know, democratically elected civilian government in Burma. But is that, what do you see as the ASEAN role beyond, if any, beyond issuing statements that kind of
let me make 4 points if you allow me, before I get to your main question.
Yeah.
First, Derek may be kind of surprised, but I entirely agree with him about the China point. And I think the US government does recognize that now, and we have gone past that, right? So that's the strategic context has changed. Secondly, I think, you know, on sanctions, I think it would be a serious mistake to think that when the Tatmadaw, the Myanmar military, says that it is the savior of the country, it's hold the country together, it's all just cynical talk. It would be a serious mistake. To them, this is an existential issue. Whether it is personally, in terms of certain generals, existential, whether it's institutionally is existential, or whether they believe it is nationally existential, it is existential. If you define the issue that way, as I think they do, then there's no cost that you can impose on them that is greater than the cost of an existential issue. Thirdly, you know, burn the economy down, that's fine. But who's going to suffer? It's not the Tatmadaw, it's not the Myanmar elite, and it's not going to change their behavior. We tried 20 years of that before, it didn't change their behavior. What can we do? Frankly, not very much that anybody can do. Not ASEAN, not the US, not China, not anybody can do. I don't know whether people in the United States sufficiently realize that Russia is now playing a significant role in Myanmar as a supplier of arms and munitions. One study I read recently by the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore, so about something like 40% of the Myanmar munitions come from Russia. You're going to change their minds? Forget it. So the Tatmadaw can hang in there for quite a long time. I don't like it. In fact, I despise it. This evening, before I came on this webinar, I was talking to some Myanmar in Singapore, and they are, and you know, I respect them. I feel sorry for them, but what can anybody do? Really, it's a classic in the Aristotelian sense of classic tragedy, a tragic situation. We just have to compose ourselves in patience and you know, try to make the best of a very bad situation. I don't disagree with Kelley. I don't disagree with Derek. And Derek will know that's a rather unusual situation, but I don't disagree with him. But you know, we are here and we do what we can do. ASEAN's job now is just to be there. Sooner or later, the Myanmar military will need a ladder to climb down on. That's us. You are right, Kelley, that the Myanmar military entirely miscalculated. They always miscalculate because they are a closed system. They listen to themselves. So they have miscalculated several times in recent history. But you know, that's an analytical point. It's not a practical point. So I'm sorry to be so pessimistic. You know me, Richard, I'm not normally pessimistic, you know, because, but you know, this time I am, you know, we just have to wait.
All right. In just a moment, I want to go to
Richard, I just, because I wanted,
yeah, so
is it
Kelley,
okay if I just.
Kelley, let me go to you. So in just a moment, I want to go to Takako Nakao, but Kelley, let me go to you, and I know you'll want to respond, but also there's a question from Nina Easton about what's known about the status or condition of Aung San Suu Kyi, who I think is under house arrest and is about to have to appear in court in the next couple of days. But if you have a better sense of what's going on there, then that's a question from her. So go over to you.
Yeah, she's expected to have her first in-person appearance, but those have been scheduled over the past 100 days and have never actually materialized. So I think everybody's kind of waiting to see if this one actually comes to fruition. It's been a very irregular process by even Burmese standards. So I just to kind of go back on a couple of the points, and I think it is funny that we are in violent agreement that China is not really benefiting from the present situation and does not love, and that there's no love lost between China and the Tatmadaw. And I'm really grateful to Bilahari actually for bringing up Russia, because they are increasingly as they were in other situations that he's mentioned, that where state collapse has come about. The Russians are selling a lot of weapons to the Tatmadaw. They've long been their major weapons supplier. This is nothing new. They also do a lot of their training for the Tatmadaw. Most of the officer corps has gone, the senior officer corps, to the extent that they go for training, it is Russian training. And so there are deep links there. But the Russians don't share a border like the Chinese do, so they don't have the same strategic interests in Burma. And they can afford to just watch it all, go to hell in a handbasket without dealing with the same repercussions that the Chinese are. So I think what we're going to see in the coming months at a geostrategic level is a diversion, an increasing diversion. It's already started, but divergence between Russian and Chinese interests in Burma are slowly but inexorably moving further apart because of the factors that Derek cited, and because the Russians tend to be just more chaos agents and very, very nihilistic and self-interested in the way that they deal with these things. This potentially actually creates some opportunities in the Security Council to leverage that divergence to get something done where nothing has been possible before. But that would require actually ASEAN to take itself out of the way, or to invite the Security Council, in a sense, into the discussion in a way that has not happened up to now. And that would require also for ASEAN to acknowledge that they are poorly equipped to deal with the political aspects of this situation. They could maybe help out with the humanitarian crisis and work through the AHA Center to do some things alongside the UN, as was done during the Panja operation after post-Nargis. But I think that ASEAN has got to have some recognition, or at least the responsible countries within ASEAN, and there I'm talking about Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, the sensible countries that actually want ASEAN to be seen as a respectable and grown-up regional organization, have to acknowledge the limitations that ASEAN has. But I really have got just to make a plea to everybody to please stop patronizing the Burmese people and talking about them as if they have no idea what their best interest is. They've lived under this military before. They don't want to go back to it. And they are literally doing everything they can to stop that from happening. And the other thing that I think it is important, what they're trying to burn down, when I say burn down the economy, is the formal economy. What has really continued is the informal economy, which is where most of the Burmese people live their lives. And I think that this is important to acknowledge as well. And so the economy, the formal economy, is where most of the elites and the Tatmadaw are able to skim off what they get. And they have less control over the day-to-day informal economy where most of the Burmese people live. Of course, there is a humanitarian crisis. There was one going on before the coup, and it's only gotten worse. But the Tatmadaw is not going to solve it. They've proven over time that they don't care about the welfare of their own people. So the idea that it's going to get better if they secure more control over the country is also not very realistic. And I'm not sure that everybody in the United States government actually gets what the three of us have agreed on, that China is not, that we're not pushing, that this is not going to push China and the Tatmadaw closer together. I think that's not quite sunk in across all of our strategic thinking, because there is a lot of lazy strategic thinking about China that continues to exist here in Washington. It will surprise no one to hear. That's it.
All right. Takahiko Nakao was the president of the Asian Development Bank, ex-vice minister of finance in Japan, and dealt with these issues for quite a while. Nakao-san, let me go over to you. You are on mute. You're muted. Can you hear us? It wouldn't be a Zoom call without saying
Yeah, thank you. So first, I'd like to say I'm so honored to be a part of this group, a Trilateral meeting, and I know many people, including Mr. Trichet and others, so I'm very proud. And so about Myanmar, I was involved with the Myanmar issues as a president of ADB, and I visited Myanmar several times when Thein Sein was the president, and then after that, Aung San Suu Kyi was president, and I met them bilaterally, and I was so happy to see a gradual move to the liberal democracy, and also the very importantly liberalizations of the economy, including the macroeconomic adjustment, structural changes by the guidance of IMF, IDB, World Bank, and so on. And a lot of money came from American companies, Japanese companies, European companies, ASEAN companies. So I think the situation has improved dramatically after 2012 or 2015. And one trigger was the lifting of US sanctions, especially on the usage of a dollar. And many countries, including Japan, joined the kind of lifting the sanctions and started the new lending by having debt relief with a talk of Paris Club in France. And so I had a discussion with those peoples, because Japan wanted to give a debt relief of billions of dollars, because Japan was the biggest outstanding donor to the country. So Japanese wanted to support them, international community wanted to support them, and then it looked like it is moving well. And of course, the military didn't like the Aung San Suu Kyi regime totally, but they at least kept 25% of seats, and there's no chance of the modifications of a constitution. So they should have a more endurance, and it is total misjudgment. This is more like analysis instead of what to do, but they have a serious misjudgment that by saying that this election was wrong, by saying that Aung San Suu Kyi was not as effective in many things, including ethnic reconciliations and Rakhine issues and so on. So they might think that, and they said that foreign business can continue business as usual, and it's just the change of the government based on the handling of elections, and it's not unconstitutional. But it is totally unacceptable way of explanation, and it was not accepted at all by the people, because people already started enjoying more liberal regime. It's not 1989 or 2008. It is already ongoing democracy. So we cannot return to the original. So what can we do? And that is a question. And in a way, once again, democracy is not perfect, and especially democracy by the majority means the kind of the repression by the majority. So Rohingya issue is in a way kind of a reaction to the democratic movement. Majority Buddhist people, in a sense, didn't like Rohingya. But overall, it is moving in a better situation. So first, we cannot accept this situation, and we cannot take action which legitimize the stance of the military. So I don't know whether sanctions like before 2012 was better or not. I don't know, but at least we cannot accept this government. And also, how to intervene is more difficult, because to make this Tatmadaw or the military counterpart for negotiation means we, in a sense, legitimize the kind of status of this military coup government. So I don't know how to intervene. So ASEAN took a very sensitive very sophisticated approach, but it didn't work. And China, I totally agree with the direct points and other points that China is not really a friend of Myanmar, and Myanmar doesn't want to be influenced by China. And as many already mentioned, Russia has maybe more influence. So how we can intervene? At least I think Japan should take a more active actions. If the government says there is a close link to the military as well as to Aung San Suu Kyi, I think Japan should take a more clear idea that this is not acceptable. And whether to have a sanction or not is a delicate issue, but I think we should not accept this stance of the coup. And we are moving to the democracy, and we cannot go back to pre-democracy era in many countries. Of course, there is a many problem in Middle East and so on. So direct intervention often causes failed states, but we cannot accept this situation.
Thank you very much. In just a second, I want to ask Zita Shelkins to ask a very good question that she put in the chat, because so much of the discussion about sanctions and whether to impose sanctions of any type now stems from what one's interpretation of whether they worked last time around. And it seems to me that the governments that sanctioned the Burmese before said, see, it led to democratization, and the ones that engaged Burma said, see, engagement led to democratization. Then every now and then you'll see that division of labor, the kind of good cop, bad cop led to democratization. So, but she sort of sharpens this question. So Zita, can I ask you to put your question on the table for the panelists?
Yeah, well, I think you did ask it better than I could actually. So thank you for that. Maybe I'll then use this opportunity to say something else. And that is that I've worked in Myanmar and Burma 3.5 years during the 2015 elections, which was of course incredibly powerful to see, and yet it's incredibly sad to see what's happening now. And I think we talk about burning the economy, but I think that's actually already happening as Myanmar is now turning to a full cash economy where people are standing in queues all night to go to the ATM to get the maximum out that's there. So the economy isn't working. And I think Derek also said this beginning of next year. So in half a year's time, they expect half of the total population to live under the poverty line. So I think I don't really share the patience that I think something needs to happen now. And I understand there's no perfect solution, unfortunately, but I think we should try and leverage all that's there. That's my first. And then the second is more of a question. As I myself worked for a multinational company, we only moved in as democratic elections came about. And I worked for Heineken, who left during the boycotts in 1996. And I've wondered quite often, what should a company now do? Because it seems as if everyone is just failing the nation. I think there's only 139 expats left in Myanmar that are in a WhatsApp group at least, because they're being taken away by their companies, by their embassies. So it feels to me as if we're just letting the situation happen. And I don't know what we should do instead, because you don't want to be working together with the military, paying taxes to the military that can be used to buy more weapons. But I find this a very big moral dilemma, and I would like to understand from the panelists how they view this. What could companies do to support the democracy movement? And again, can't we think of all that we should do and at least try and see if it's successful? Thank you.
That's a great question. Just I see Kelley, you want to take that, and then Derek and or Bilahari, if you would like to. I see Derek, and then maybe we'll go to Bilahari. So Kelley, you go first.
Sure. I think that, as Derek noted, I agree that that because there is this ethno-nationalist, centrality to the Tatmadaws thinking, this kind of xenophobic thinking, that they do not wish to be a client state of China. This is not Cambodia. They're not going to allow themselves to do that. I think Burma also is and this is, oddly a point that Than Shwe made during Nargis is, the Burmese people will find a way to survive. This country is very fertile. They have a lot of natural resources. They can be quite self-sufficient for quite a long time. Even, as you look at metrics like people falling into poverty and food insecurity and poverty, all of those things those metrics that we can apply from outside don't necessarily mean that the situation, and I'm not saying it's good, don't get me wrong. There will be backsliding from 2019, from 2020, even as a baseline, but things can get a lot worse before they get really, really desperate on the ground in Burma. And so I think that the key here is to give agency to the Burmese people. And that's what I like about what Zita is saying, is that we've got to recognize their agency and what they're asking us to do. I think that putting the targeted sanctions on especially on key sources of revenue that help accelerate us getting to that point that Bilahari talked about, where the Tatmadaw does need a ladder to climb out of, and whatever that ladder looks like, and we can debate that, whatever that is, but they do need to be put under pressure to accelerate to that point where they do feel like they need to reconsider their actions and their course of action and their current trajectory. And the international community, especially financially, Singapore and their banks in particular, has a role to play in accelerating us toward that point. And I believe that doing that and putting as much pressure as quickly as possible, that helps them to lose that internal cohesion within their ruling coalition, is the best thing that we can do for the Burmese people, rather than take our time using salami slicing incrementalist approaches that allow everything to be drawn out as we've seen in the past. If we actually try to really attack the sources of revenue that keep the junta afloat and really go after them in a very, very intentional way, then we have a better chance of pushing that moment forward. And I think that as far as multinational corporations, you do face a terrible moral dilemma. I think that there are ways to continue to support the Burmese people. I'm talking to some of the groups that work cross-border and some of the groups that continue to work through their mechanisms that were Rangoon-based and go out. And they've been able to find ways. The key for them was that they didn't rely on the government in the first place. They never did. And so they've been able to operate continually without having to worry about and navigate around the government as it is now. So I think that, and I don't want to go into too much detail on that because the way they do that is a little bit, off the books. But I think that there are ways to do that. And then if you have revenues that are supposed to be paid to the government or taxes that are supposed to be paid to a ministry or whatever, put those in an escrow account instead of handing them over to the junta is kind of the first step. And don't, and then see what happens. I think that because they do want to present this image that companies can continue to do business there, they're not going to throw embassies out. They're not going to throw companies out because they're trying to present this image of normalcy that's not reality. So I don't think that they're going to take those steps. That's my impression.
Bilahari, what's your view on that? And also this question about whether sanctions worked before and whether, I think we know your view on whether they will work now, but whether they worked before and therefore how we should interpret their effect now. Oh, you're on mute. You're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, I'll be very brief, right? Because we are running out of time. First of all, let's be all realistic, and there's nothing very much any of us can do right now to influence the Tatmadaw. As I mentioned before, to them, this is an existential issue. There is no cost you can impose that is greater than the cost of what they define as an existential issue. Second, multilateral, multinational corporations, I recognize your dilemma, but it is a dilemma which has no solution. My advice to you is lay low and bide your time. Thirdly, I think we have to all acknowledge that the first principle or wherever we are coming from is, first of all, do no harm. Try to do no harm. And then we just have to be patient. Look, it's not a good situation. It's a bad situation for everybody. For the United States, for ASEAN, for China, for Japan, for everybody. Maybe not such a bad situation for Russia because they have no stakes in this thing, right? All they want to do is sell weapons and pretend to be important. But, you know, let us first of all acknowledge this is a very bad situation for everybody, and there is nothing very much we can do. The initiative is, unfortunately, bitter as it may be, with the Tatmadaw. Start from that premise.
All right. Derek, let's give you the last word here as we're running down here. And one thing that, and certainly if you have a view on the role of multinational corporations or sanctions in the previous era, which you saw, you know, firsthand, but also, you know, what we're talking about on the ground is a dynamic that goes beyond people on the streets of Rangoon and the Tatmadaw, right? Because there's the ethnic groups that have clashed with the government. I mean, you see fraying around all of the edges of Burmese society now, including but not limited to the dynamic we've been talking about here. So if you sort of look into your crystal ball, I know it's hard, but where do you see this going over the next year or two?
That is an impossible question in a lot of ways, Richard. But
all right,
let me just say a few things, because there's so. First of all, Bilahari may be surprised that I agree with much of his analysis of things generally.
I'm not surprised because we always agree.
Yes, it's just that his resulting policy, you know, suggestions, and his, you know, and what he suggests here, I completely disagree. And look, it's very true that the military has that view of itself. It's also a highly corrupt institution. I mean, it does believe on the one hand that it is important for the future and that somehow they have this privileged position there that they have to hold the country together, and they teach themselves this. It's part of their training, is that they are unique.
A closed circle.
Yes, a closed circle. That said, it is a highly corrupt and highly self-interested as well. So it's not one or the other, it's both. And it's not, I mean, it does hold together, but it's held together in a lot of ways, both by that ideology, but also by fear. There's a lot of people within that group who are held there because of fear. They're afraid of their seniors who might inflict pain on them if they break from the orthodoxy. So when Bilahari says the military or they, as Kelley suggests, there are a lot of fractures. I would bet, and what we hear is there are a lot of people in that military, even in relatively senior levels, who did not agree with this coup and believe this was bad for the country, believe that they can't say it, they can't do anything about it. It's very unlikely they're going to fragment. So I agree with Bilahari on the sense of pessimism. I'm not sure anybody here has any illusions that anything is going to change easily in the short term. That's not the issue. And in fact, I used to hate that question when I was ambassador. I get asked, are you an optimist or you're pessimistic about the future? I said, I'm neither. I'm a realist. My job is not to put bets on what's going to happen and what's, you know, my job is to every day think about what can we do to try to make it better and see if we can get a better outcome than not. And my problem with Bilahari is his whole attitude is fatalistic. It's not pessimistic. It's fatalistic. It's passive. It's saying there's nothing we can do. That's not true. There's a lot that we can do. We just choose not to do it. Sorry?
Name 3 things.
Well, we did.
Cut off their oil and gas revenue. Singapore banks have the accounts, the dollar accounts. Just don't let them have access to them. They don't really belong to the SAC anyway.
Okay, even if we do, you think they'll give up?
No, I'm not saying, look, I'm not saying.
It's about pushing them to that point, Bilahari.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, putting more pressure than
is an existential issue for them. And if it's existential, there is no cost you can impose that is greater than an existential issue.
Question is, who is them? There are different thems. And
no, I don't think, I think you're right Derek, that Tatmadaw is not entirely monolithic, but they are very disciplined. And right now, they're all so far stepped in blood.
Yes.
That
yes.
returning is worse.
Yes, that's right. But there is a lot of people.
Derek, I'm gonna ask you just to wrap up. I would love to keep this going, and I'm not sure we'll come to any agreement, but that's not the point. This is a real debate over prescriptions about a very pressing problem. So, but we do need to wrap up. So, it's Derek, if you can conclude, and then I'll say thank you to all of you. But and then maybe we can keep this going in another session at some point.
Yes, well, you can read our competing pieces in foreign papers. Essentially, that lays out what we just discussed here. But there's a lot we can do if we choose to do it. It's not that I necessarily am optimistic that it will change things, and we can't go back to the way it was. So the real question, your question, just to wrap up, of where it's going to go, who knows? I think things have gotten so bad, things have been so polarized, the economy is so devastated that it was difficult, even in the previous hybrid system, to see where it was going to, how they're going to get through the deprivation of the past 50 years. It's very difficult to see how this is going to be resolved, but we have to at least stop the killing, get humanitarian aid, get the military to reassess. We're not going to get them to step aside entirely. They have to reassess their strategy and figure out if there's a way together that the region can get engaged to try to put it back on track, because it's not going to be able to do it on its own.
Okay, well, certainly more to come on this issue. I can see the debate carrying over even into the chat, and it certainly will in print and potentially before the Trilateral Commission going forward. So Ambassador Currie, Ambassador Kausikan, Ambassador Mitchell, thank you for your time and for your views. I think this is a really excellent debate and exchange of views. To all the members of the Trilateral Commission, thanks for joining in for this call. We'll be back, as everyone knows, with more. And I know that the European group has a number of things lined up with their meeting and so forth coming up. So watch this space on that. And thanks to everybody. Thank you again to our panelists and everyone.